All right, so welcome back to more online notes. Since this week currently, again, is a somewhat optional week or additional work, I'm going to continue with the polynomials and quadratic unit because we are waiting on a plan that should be approved next week for kind of required online learning, the way the state expects things to be done. So this is additional work. However, it is work that in ninth grade math you would cover, and if you end up not taking ninth grade math at YHA and moving directly into 10th grade math, it will be really useful. It's one of the things I was hoping to get to this year. So what we'll be doing is factoring polynomials, but specifically factoring quadratics with a leading coefficient of 1. And since we're doing this on the 7th, I will mark it as the 7th. All right, so before we do that, I want to do kind of a quick review. So hopefully you all had a great spring break. And you got to at least do some fun stuff, even if it wasn't necessarily what you planned. So let's just do a little review of multiplying binomials. In other words, using the FOIL method. Remember that stands for first, outer, or outside, depending on what you look at, inner, or inside, and last. All right, now if you, here are the 3 examples. If you want to try them, go ahead and stop the video so that you can try these examples. So we'll start with x plus 2 times x plus 9, let's say. Our second example will be, we'll move that up a little bit. And then our second example, let's change that color, will be x minus 6 times x plus 1. And the last example that we're going to multiply will be x minus 8 times x minus 3. Okay, so if you want to try those, go ahead and stop the video so that you can try them before you watch the answers. If you'd like to just watch, that's fine as well. All right, so now remember we're going to do the first. So in this case, those first 2. Now you don't have to go in this order, but this is kind of just a way to think about it. Whatever works for you is fine. So x times x, which is, of course, x squared. Okay, and then outer, so which will be this outer one and that outer one. So 9 times x, which is a positive 9x. So we're going to multiply each of these pieces. Then inner, which is 2 times x, which would be plus 2x. And then you'll have the last 2 times 9, which is plus 18. All right, and now you don't normally leave it that way, although it's not incorrect, but normally we simplify that at that point. And the only thing that are like terms here are the 9x and the 2x. So I would just write x squared. 9x and 2x is plus 11x, and then plus that 18. Okay, so I'll do the second one. Let's go with some multiple colors here. Okay, so x minus 6 and x plus 1. X times x is x squared. Outer x times 1 is 1x. Okay, and then inner, negative 6 times x, which is minus 6x. And then negative 6, the last 2, negative 6 times the positive 1, which is minus 6. Okay, And then again, we would combine that. I'm going to use orange. It's kind of hard to see that purple, I think. It's just x squared because I can't add any like terms there. And then the 1x and the negative 6x will be minus 5x. And then the minus 6. Okay, and our third and last example, that's kind of a review of what we did before spring break, is this last one. So again, first outer, inner, last, or first outside, inside, last. X times x is x squared. Outer, x times negative 3, which is negative 3x. Okay. Inner, which is negative 8 times x, which is minus 8x. And then last, negative 8 times a negative 3, which is positive 24. Okay, and then you're going to combine the inner terms to give you x squared. And these two terms become minus 11x, because negative 8 minus another 3 is negative 11, and then plus 24. Okay, now I did these three problems to give you an idea how you're going to kind of do the reverse, which is what we're going to do this time. So factoring would be going from this form to this form. So starting with your, what's kind of like an expanded form, expanded polynomial, quadratic, and then specifically, and then going to that factored form, but with a leading coefficient of 1. Okay. So factoring quadratics, but the leading coefficient, meaning the term in front of the x squared, is just going to be 1. Okay, so in other words, things like this. So you have a 1x squared plus 1, let's say. Okay, so it would be that x squared plus 2x plus 1. Okay? So, basically you're going to do the reverse of what you did before. So let's start with an example. It's a little bit easier to start with an example. So our first example... Sorry, there's the dogs for you. Apparently, someone's driving by. So let's start with kind of one that is mainly positive. Let's say x squared plus 4x plus 3. Okay, something like that. Now, if you kind of go with the reverse, we're going to have this as an x and then something, and then another x and something. So that is going to be like our factored form will be x blank something, x blank something. Now, in the two numbers, obviously since all of these numbers are positive, these are going to be plus. Okay? So now what you're looking for is what is this number and what is this number? Okay, but if you kind of look back at the factored form ones, these are the two last terms here, right? So if you look as we went from FOIL to the expanded form, these two last terms, so the last terms, which are two numbers, right, with no x, will multiply to this last term here. Okay, so they'll multiply to that coefficient that has no variable, or has x to the power of 0 technically. Okay, so two numbers multiply to 3. And those same two numbers, because this middle term, if you kind of go back, that middle term, it was adding the 9 here, 9x, and the 2x here, right? So those two numbers will have to add to that middle term. So you notice 9 times 2 is that 18 here, and the 9 plus 2 is that 11 here. So in our example, the two numbers, the same two numbers, which are those last terms, will add to 4. So I don't like to say add to the middle term and multiply the last term, but if you keep them in this order, that would be correct. So I'm looking for two numbers that will multiply to 3 and will add to 4. Now you can kind of make a list, but there aren't a whole lot of numbers that multiply to 3. So the only two numbers I can think of that are, we could do 3 times 1, or of course we could have them both. It could be negative 3 times negative 1. But because this is a positive 4 and they have to add to 4, my numbers are going to be positive 3 and positive 1. Okay, so this in factored form is x plus 3 times x plus 1. Now, of course, the reverse order is just fine. X plus 1 times x plus 3. Okay? I'm going to do a couple more examples, and then I'd like you to practice some IXL problems on this, and if you'd like to go back to any FOIL method problems, you can as well, but that will be in, that's in the Google Classroom assignment you hopefully are looking at. All right, so a couple more examples. So let's do one that has some negatives here. Now I'm going to go ahead and flip the page. All right, so now we have x squared minus 9x plus 8. Okay, that I want to factor that. Okay, so I'm looking for, again, two numbers, and they're going to multiply to 8, and they're going to add to negative 9. Now, if you think about it, these numbers have to multiply to a positive, but they have to add to a negative. So if one of the numbers was negative and one of them was positive, they would not multiply to a positive. Okay, so both numbers are going to need to be negative, because they have to add to a negative, but multiply to a positive. All right, so I'm going to start with kind of x minus and x minus. You could have written that all out. You didn't have to figure that out right away, but I kind of prefer to figure it out right away. So I know I have two numbers and they're both negative. And now they have to multiply to 8. Okay, so if I'm going to multiply to 8, I could do negative 4 times negative 2. I could do negative 8 times negative 1. Okay, those are the only pairs of numbers that are both negative and multiply to a positive 8. Now if I look at it, negative 4 plus negative 2 is negative 6, not negative 9. So negative 8 times negative 1 would be my answer. So I will put those two numbers in there, or of course I could write the reverse, x minus 1 times x minus 8. Now of course if the middle term had been minus 6x, then my answer would have been those two numbers. All right, so let's do one more example, and I'm going to try to find one that doesn't have multiplying that way. I know this was example 2. Can't leave it without a number. All right, now, final example, third problem here. Let's see, hopefully you can see the yellow. Yep. All right, so the third example here, let's go with x squared minus 7x minus 18. So I'm going to factor x squared minus 7x minus 18. Okay, so I need two numbers, and the numbers need to multiply. They're going to multiply to a negative 18, and they're going to add to a negative 7. Now, of course, if two numbers multiply to a negative, one of those numbers has to be negative, and one is positive. So we know that one is negative and one is positive. I like to kind of figure that out first, so I can kind of narrow down my choices. You could, of course, write them all out if you wanted to. So I'm just going to start with the positive number. It really doesn't matter. It could have been beginning with the negative. Okay, now I'm going to think of all of the numbers that I can think of that will multiply to a negative 18. Okay, so if I kind of just draw my list here, multiplying to a negative 18. Well, of course, there's negative 18 and positive 1. Or there's negative 1 and positive 18. So I can kind of reverse that. Both of those could multiply to 18. I could also do negative 6 and positive 3. Or negative 3 and positive 6. And I also could do negative 9 and positive 2. Or negative 2 and positive 9. And as you're watching this, some of you may have already figured out what pair. So as I'm looking at this, when I now think about what did they add to, Negative 18 and positive 1 adds to a negative 17. So that's not correct. Negative 1 and 18 adds to a positive 17. Not correct. Negative 6 and 3, if I add those up, this adds to a negative 3. Not correct. Negative 3 and positive 6 adds to a positive 3. So again, not my answer. Negative 9 and positive 2 adds to a negative 7. And that one is the one that I will need to use. This one would add to a positive 7, so not correct either. So I kind of wrote these in the reverse order, so I would write x plus 2 here. It needs to be the 2 that's positive, and x minus 9. It doesn't, again, actually matter, though. You could have written it in this order, x minus 9, and x plus 2 is just fine. All right, thanks for watching, and hopefully you're able to do about 15 or so minutes of practice on this, and hopefully you understand it. If you have any trouble, please call, email, or anything like that, or possibly a Zoom, depending on when we're able to do that. Thanks a lot, and have a wonderful day.